Hi everyone and welcome to Deep Geek Live. If you are watching live, then apologies for the slight delay. I had a few technical issues. If you're watching back a little bit later, then welcome. Today we are talking about Frodo, who is in many ways, the main character, the main protagonist of The Lord of the Rings, and yet we often kind of underplay him. We talk about the other characters, so I wanted to just give him the focus that he is probably due in this story. As always, I'm going to frame my stream around the questions that I've got in advance from my patrons. They have thankfully worked through quite well, I think, through his story. So we're going to start out with a whole load of background about who he was and then work our way through the story as a whole. As always, I'll try and pick up as many questions as I can in the chat as we are going through. But just very briefly, before we get going, what I try to do every time is just give a little bit of a flavour of some things going on in the slightly wider geeky world. The one thing I would draw your attention to this week is the return of The Legend of Vox Machina, which, if you didn't watch the first season, it was just a whole load of fun. It's on Amazon. It's just, it's animated. It's based on Critical Role, if you ever saw that, so D&D based, but just really entertaining stuff. There's nothing hugely, I mean this in a good way, nothing hugely groundbreaking there, but it's just good. So if you like that, season 2 is out. I didn't see huge amounts of advertising for it, so it slightly caught me by surprise, but it's out there now. I watched the first episode, enjoyed it. But let's get into this today. Do let me know, by the way, if the technical difficulties are still there. So hopefully you can both see and hear me. Those were the problems before. Okay, so let's start talking about Frodo, and I'll open this with the King's Road. Actually, just as we saw in the chat, somebody talking about The Last of Us. I can't remember if I said this last time. The Last of Us episode 1 was really good, really good. I've not had time to watch episode 2 yet, but if you haven't seen it on HBO, do go and check that out. It does seem to be, just on the basis of one episode so far, the best video game to TV adaptation that I've seen. Really very good. Okay, so let's start with a question from the King's Road, saying, "G'day, Robert. G'day to you. What was Frodo up to during the 50 years before his adventure? Did he have a job? What did he do to pass the time? Do we know much about this period?" So let's start with Frodo's background. So yes, he was about 50 when we get the story of The Lord of the Rings. When we first see him, he's 33. This is the Bilbo's birthday. It was his 11th birthday. It was a shared birthday. He had the same birthday, September 22nd, as Frodo. Frodo was 33, which was his coming of age. That's the Hobbit coming of age. Hobbits live, just for context, a little bit older generally to humans. An average life expectancy for a Hobbit was about 100 years. So 33 was, I'm guessing for Tolkien, the equivalent of 21 probably was back in his age, that kind of thing. In terms of his growing up as a Hobbit, he did grow up as a Baggins. He was Frodo, son of Drogo Baggins, and he unfortunately lost both of his mother was a brandybuck, and he unfortunately lost both of his parents to a boating accident while he was young. Now, this is just given as a little bit of a minor detail by Tolkien, but I have to say, the more I think about it, the more this does kind of hit home. Because if you just think about that last scene in the Fellowship of the Ring, in the book, it's also, I think, pretty much the last scene we have there in the movie as well. Frodo and Sam in the boat crossing over. Frodo was going to get into the boat, crossing over the river to the far side on his own. That was, we know, quite a brave moment. He's heading off on his own to try and take the ring all the way to Mount Doom. But when you realize that his parents had died in a boating accident. Him getting into a boat and rowing across to the other side, that close to where you get to the heavy current leading into the waterfall, that was actually in and of itself, that was probably quite an important moment for him. Tolkien doesn't draw attention to it, but I think that will have been in the back of his mind. This was him moving through. This was him getting to the other side where he could take control and move on his own. He wanted to go without Sam, remember. Anyway, he was brought up in Brandybuck Hall. He was brought up over there in the east of the Shire, and he has childhood memories of stealing mushrooms from Farmer Maggot, and Farmer Maggot set his dogs on him, which is why Frodo's a little bit scared of Farmer Maggot much later. But Bilbo decides to effectively adopt Frodo. He brings him over to Bag End and he raises him in Bag End. What does he do during this time? Well, I think reading between the lines, the Baggins were upper middle class. Bag End is clearly described as being a very nice place for hobbits. He clearly has staff, Sam, the gardener, Gaffer Gamgee, they work for him. It doesn't appear that he has a job per se. Now, what does he do with his time? Well, Bilbo educates him. He teaches him stories. He teaches him how to read. He teaches him how to write. We read that they go on long walks together. He teaches him Elvish or rudimentary Elvish. So this is a time of learning for Bilbo up to the point where for Frodo, up to the point where Bilbo goes. While Frodo is growing up, he is learning from Bilbo. For the next 17 years, we'll get into the details a little bit about what's going on there, but this sort of seems to carry on. Then he's running Bag End. There's quite a lot of work to deal with Bilbo's will and the effects, giving out presents to a whole load of people. After that, he seems to just spend his time enjoying life in the Shire. He continues to go on walks. He continues to have staff running places. That is his life. He is a Baggins. He is a Baggins who just enjoys the comforts of home. So that's what he is like. We know that Bilbo was chosen because he is part Baggins, and also he had that Tookish nature to him from Bilbo's ancestry as well. Frodo came from a slightly different line, but he was spiritually from Bilbo, because Bilbo was his basically his, I mean, he called him his uncle, but he was an adopted son, basically. So that's what he was doing in the first 50 or so years of his life. Let's go to some questions in the chat. Martin S. saying, I think Tolkien made the right choice in giving Frodo some kind of PTSD after the burdens, endeavours and terrors of his journey. The Morgul knife must have been horrific. Leaving him unscarred would have been unbelievable. Yeah, I think I would agree with this completely. And this is, I will come on to this later on in the live stream, because I do want to talk a little bit about the end of Frodo's life and the impact on him. But this was a very kind of real moment for Tolkien, and I think it built on his own experiences. He went to World War One. He was in World War One. It was horrific. He was at the Battle of the Somme, which was one of the most terrible battles in history. And he wrote very moving, very sparingly. It was clearly something close to who he was, but very movingly about the fact that when he came back from that war, almost all of his closest friends were dead. And this left scars in him. And I think that he could not conceive of somebody going through the kind of adventure that Frodo did without having those same kind of scars, both physical and emotional scars. So yes, I think this was absolutely right by Tolkien. I think that if you go to a lot of these kind of stories successor stories to Tolkien, I suppose we might call them, where the hero goes off, saves the day, comes back and lives happily ever after. That wasn't really the kind of world that Tolkien built. He built a world in which the heroes came back with scars from what they did. And it meant something. It cost them a lot to achieve what they did. So absolutely, I think he made completely the right choice. Maura Lee saying, just a show of love and support for all the fabulous content. Hi there, Maura, by the way. Saying, really enjoyed listening to the story of Hansel and Gretel on the Well-Told Tale. Love and hugs to you and your handsome dog, Dan. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I have a second channel, The Well-Told Tale. Please do check that out if you want to listen to basically me reading what I consider to be the finest science fiction, fantasy, speculative fiction stories of all time. Always going to be free, always there on a podcast, on YouTube. Sometimes there's a little bit of a break between stories if it's taking me a bit of time, but it's just something I'm really committed to. I want everybody to have access to these stories. So if you're interested in that, if you'd love to hear me read stories, then please do go check out The Well-Told Tale. And Morally also saying, for all the fabulous mods. Yeah, so just a very quick shout out. Agreed Weirwood, I don't know whether you're there in the chat. I know that you've had a few things going on. Just sending my love to you. Take your time and every blessing to you. You are missed here when you are not here. Let's go to a couple of questions. Lord of the House of Stormcrow saying, Robert broke Saruman in a voice battle. Ecthelion. Ecthelion is a great name. It has to be said. Let's go to a question. And Morally again. Morally saying, for Samwise Gamgee. Yeah, absolutely. I want to focus on Frodo for this one. I love Samwise. He is my favorite character. But that's not to take anything away from Frodo himself. Reflective Rambling, picking up a question for Amy Smith, saying we talk, and I love it. Thank you so much for doing that. I love it when people pick up questions for others. We talk about foresight a lot for other characters. Is it possible Bilbo had something like that in the decision to adopt Frodo? This is interesting. I'm actually at the moment writing a video. My starting point for it is, can Gandalf see the future? But there's a lot of characters in The Lord of the Rings who have some degree of foresight. And it's actually quite a fun thing when you read through The Lord of the Rings in particular, also a lot of the other bits of Tolkien's writing. The amount of times that characters say things like, I feel in my heart that. And what often follows is some kind of truth about what's going to happen in the future. And it's not limited to the characters who you think might have some kind of vision of the future. The Gandalfs, the Elrons, people like that. It's quite often Theoden says it a couple of times. Aragorn does as well. Might Bilbo have had something like that in picking Frodo? Well, this is a tough one. We don't have any evidence. Tolkien doesn't write about this, but at least as far as I'm aware. But clearly there is an element that when Gandalf says to Frodo, he says that Bilbo was meant to have the ring. And that means so were you. And that is a comforting thought. And I think that is. And so basically, it's not so much perhaps that Bilbo had some kind of great foresight. I have to have Frodo here for really important reasons, because he didn't think that there was anything particularly important about his little ring. All the way through when he's still talking about, oh, just my little ring, there's nothing. But he genuinely thought that because Gandalf didn't say anything to him. It was only really at his 11th birthday when he found it so hard to give it up, when Gandalf really started noticing how his life was being extended by it. That's the point at which Gandalf started to get real suspicions about what was going on. So Bilbo never really thought, I've got this ring that I need to find somebody special to hand this on to. That wasn't a part of the decision-making process. but that does not mean that it was not meant to be. It was clearly meant to be, and that fate, if we call it as such, in Tolkien's world did drive Bilbo in that decision. He could have just left Bag End to the Sackville Bagginses. The fact that he didn't, part fate, part I suspect that he just didn't like the Sackville Bagginses, which is completely understandable. Question from where are we up to? Karen Thomas saying, hi, I've not been around for a while, just an appreciation for the great work you do. Thank you so much. As always, I'll be back when the subtitles are available. Thank you for that. Just a very quick question for those who need the subtitles. Could you put it, I find it hard to follow all of the chat as it's going through. Could you put down in the comments if you're a person who needs the subtitles? I'm trying to improve on accessibility of my videos. Very quick point, but I'm trying to improve on the accessibility of my videos through this year. I think the subtitles do come through at some point later on for the live streams. I think that they're okay. Could you just confirm that for me? Because that's a thing that I would find it useful to know that works. Ditto for the other things. If there is another way that I can improve accessibility for my videos, I would love to know it. I can't make any promises, but this is just a thing I would like to do. So, as I say, I think the subtitles usually arrive in a day or so after the live stream, but do let me know. Let's go to a question from Diego Godoy saying, Hola, Robert. Hola. How do you think the fact that Frodo grew up with Bilbo and without his parents impacted his character for the Lord of the Rings story? Did this make him more bold, for example? Well, this is a really interesting one because it definitely did impact on it. Bilbo was a bit odd for a hobbit. He was viewed as a bit odd for a hobbit. He was viewed as being suspicious. He had an adventure. He not only had an adventure, but he often had strange visitors. He met the dwarves came to see him. He went out, he loved elves, and he would sort of wander off for a few days at a time. This was not usual hobbit behavior. And the fact that Frodo grew up with that during his impressionable years definitely made the idea of leaving the Shire, for example, less weird a thought than it might have been if he'd grown up just with his normal parents. So whether it made him more bold, I don't know whether bold is the word I would use, but that feel is definitely there. That Bilbo taught him, and Sam, incidentally, who was there and listened into a huge amount of this, he taught them a love of the wider world that perhaps they didn't, or they wouldn't otherwise have had. I mean, the idea, I'm pretty sure Gaffer Gamgee, Sam's father, would never have bothered to go beyond the boundaries of the Shire, because why would you? And Sam has some hesitation, but of course he goes there as well. The same goes more so for Frodo. We don't hear we hear a bit from Frodo about, I don't know where I'm going. This is a big and wild and crazy world out there, but a whole lot less than if he hadn't had that influence from Bilbo quite early on. Let's go with Diok Sir. Again, we're talking about the earlier years from Frodo here. Diok Sir saying, in the books, Gandalf is away for far longer, finding out clues about Bilbo's treasure. Frodo was a young hobbit at that time, so those years should make a big difference to him, right? Would it put him in another age group? And while you're at it, a 17-year research time seems strange. The archives of the biggest city of men should be one of the first places to look. So what took him so long? Was it love of the halfling's leaf? No, it wasn't love of the halfling's leaf. And incidentally, that actually that comes from Saruman. This is ironic because Saruman was more addicted to it than Gandalf was by a long way. When Saruman is there mocking Gandalf for his love of the halfling's leaf, that is actual psychological projection on his part. But In terms of his age, yeah, so he was 50. He started at 33 was when we meet him at the long expected party. He's 50 when he leaves, which makes him, if not quite middle-aged, then certainly a fully grown hobbit. That's the kind of feel that we've got going on. Now, does that make a difference to him? Yeah, I think it does. Obviously, Tolkien shows the difference between him and Pippin quite a lot. Now, Pippin obviously is a took, so is more adventurous, tries a whole load more things, but Tolkien writes him as a lot more of a younger, more inexperienced character. Frodo is the oldest of the hobbits, and he is the more mature of the characters, which isn't to mean that he's not hobbity. He's still definitely hobbity. He loves home comforts, but he's not got that kind of youthful exuberance that someone like Pippin does. The 17-year research time is this is an interesting one, because I think a lot of the slight misunderstanding that comes from this comes from the films, because in the films, for understandable reasons, this always happens, adapting page to screen, they made a few changes, and I've got no problem with this particular change. They squashed the time down to start with, and basically it had Gandalf. We had the party, and then Gandalf gets suspicious and heads off and learns a few things, and then comes back, and it's not 17 years. They basically got rid of that. And then, so a lot of people, I'm not saying necessarily you, but I'm sure a lot of people often go, well, hang on a moment, why did it take him 17 years to research all of this? That doesn't seem right. So I think it's probably worth just breaking down what that 17 years was, because this wasn't just a random amount of time that Tolkien just thought, oh, well, and then a period of time went by and nothing much happened. Gandalf started getting suspicions about the ring around the time of that party, as we've said. We could get the speech from Bilbo about being butter spread over too much toast. Gandalf can see at 11:1 he's still very sprightly. Hobbits, as we say, they normally live to about 100. So at 111, Bilbo is very old for a hobbit, and yet he doesn't seem to be showing it. So Gandalf, by this point, is starting to get suspicious, and he gets particularly suspicious when he finds out how hard it is for Bilbo to be getting rid of this ring. Now, at that point, he doesn't immediately suspect that this is the One Ring. Why would he suspect that this is the One Ring? The One Ring has been gone. It's been disappeared for 3,000 years. He doesn't immediately, and Bilbo found it very randomly underneath the Misty Mountains. So how on earth could it get there? He doesn't immediately think it's the One Ring. He does, however, upgrade his thoughts from what he originally thought, which was that this was just a rando magical ring, to maybe this is one of the rings of power. Maybe this is one of the ones that Celebrimbor did forge, which suddenly makes it even more important, because they all have in different ways this kind of life extending attribute to them. So he starts to suspect that. Then for the next few years, although his suspicions aren't full at this time, he decides, you know what, I'm going to keep a check on Frodo. And so for a few years, he keeps a check on Frodo. He pops back to the Shire on a regular basis, just comes into Baggins, says, hi, how are you doing? What's going on? And during that time, he's actually, the other hobbits are a little bit suspicious of Gandalf at this point, because they kind of blamed him for what happened with Bilbo suddenly disappearing. So Gandalf kind of arrives late in the evening, leaves first thing in the morning. It's quite sort of funny the way that Tolkien describes it. But he obviously sees enough during that time of proactively checking back on Frodo to make him go, okay, I want to know the background to this ring. Again, his thought is not, this is the One Ring. He's thinking, what's going on with this ring? And so his thought is, where did Bilbo get this from? Gollum. Let's try and find Gollum. He's made friends with Aragorn by this point, and he and Aragorn go hunting for Gollum. So that is what a huge amount of this time is taken up with, is the hunt for Gollum. Because Gollum, if you remember, at the end of The Hobbit, or the end of his appearance in The Hobbit, Bilbo escaped from under the Misty Mountains. He sort of like squeezed his way through that hole, lost a few buttons on the way, and Gollum is there screaming with anguish. He does not want to go out into the sunlight. But eventually, the lure of the ring is so great that he does follow, and he tracks Bilbo and the dwarves on their route very slowly. A long time after they went, he's not actually tracking their footprints or anything like that. He's sort of hiding outside people's houses, listening into the conversations. Oh, do you remember that time when all those dwarves came through? Works his way up to Lake Town, hears the stories of what's happening there, turns around, comes all his way back, tracks where they were going after, and then Bilbo came back and he was there. He had all of this these goodies that he'd got. He was there. So he's tracking them. Years after this, he's very slowly tracking them. And he gets back. He's heading back to on the route that Bilbo went, at which point Sauron has taken up power in Mordor. And he's basically calling the forces of evil to him. And so Gollum then gets drawn by this, because obviously Sauron and the One Ring, they have this, they're of one essence, and he gets drawn by this, and that's how he ends up in Mordor. That's how Sauron captures him, and that's when he gives away Baggins, the Shire, and that's how Sauron learns about those things. He releases him, Aragorn captures him. At this point, that's when we get Gandalf starting to think, maybe this is the One Ring. And he then goes hunting in through the library in Minas Tirith, and he comes across the account from Isildur all those years ago, and the account of when it was hot, the writing was in there. That is when he suddenly thinks, that's how I'm going to discover if this is that ring. And he charges back to the Shire and throws it into the fire. So that is what is going on there. The short answer, that was quite a long, rambly version of what Gandalf was up to during that time. But the short answer is he didn't start out thinking this was the One Ring. And so he didn't go hunting for evidence about where the One Ring is. Saruman, who was at the time the head of their order, had said with great confidence, he says, the One Ring must have washed out to the sea by now. It's long gone. So Gandalf, although he had his suspicions about Saruman as well, Gandalf kind of did accept that. The One Ring probably was gone. So, first of all, he just kept an eye on Frodo. Then he went trying to track this down from Gollum, to find out the story from Gollum. Then he went to Minas Tirith, and that's when he put everything together. Martin S. saying, do you think Frodo got to see Gandalf having dropped the adopted old man form and returning to the native Maya Olorin form in Valinor? Did he get to meet Manwë, Vada, or any of the other Valar? Oh, this is a really fun question. So right at the very end of his life, obviously, we get Frodo going to the Undying Lands. He gets on the boat, he heads off. Now, this is not, as some may think, giving him eternal life. The Undying Lands do not give you eternal life. Being there does not give you eternal life, but it will allow him to be at peace. So this is why Frodo went there. I mean, I think he actually went to Tol Eressëa, for those who care about these kind of details. Did he see Gandalf in his kind of Elorin actual Maya form? I suspect he probably did, and it would not surprise me if he did sort of en route as well. We don't see everything from Frodo's perspective, but there was when he first saw Glorfindel, he saw Glorfindel in his natural form, somebody who has recently been in Valinor. I suspect so bright and shining and almost angelic. So I suspect that yes, he would have seen all of those who he was with in their greater forms, and yeah, indeed, I think that. Did he get to meet Manwë, Vardor, or any of the other Valar? We simply do not know. Tolkien does not tell us. I mean, I like to think so, but Manwë maybe not, Vardor maybe not. So perhaps Ulmo is my guess. Partly because I've got a soft spot for Ulmo, but also partly he's the Valar who goes out the most from Valinor, being of the seas. And if Frodo was there in Tol Eressëa, then that kind of makes sense for me. Let's go to a question from Julien Dubois, or Julien, perhaps. Thank you for all you do. Thank you very much indeed. I missed the start. I hope I'm not repeating a question. I often feel Frodo isn't a greatly beloved character, quite unjustly. Do you agree? Any possible reason others, aside from being overshadowed by Super Sam? Well, no, I mean, I very, very briefly touched on this right at the beginning, but you're not repeating a question. Yeah, I think he does. When we're sort of going through who's our favorite character in The Lord of the Rings, I think very few people, there will be some who say Frodo, but I think very few people say Frodo. It's something to do with the fact, I think, that yes, he's overshadowed by Sam, who is clearly written as being this wonderful character. Partly due to the fact that at the end, he fails, in as much as he doesn't personally throw the ring in. Tolkien, incidentally, I did do a video on this ages ago. Tolkien, incidentally, did not see this as a failure on Frodo's part. That's a whole different video. But on just a plain text reading, he didn't do the thing that he was sent there to do. Partly due to the fact that he's a bit glum, to put it bluntly, a bit earnest. And this is more so, I think, in the films than in the books, but he is the person who was there, always kind of like being slightly gloomy about things. He is being affected by the One Ring, so he comes across in not a particularly positive light. Should we give him more credit? Absolutely, we should give him more credit, because he is the one carrying the One Ring. Almost any other character you can think of would have been affected a whole lot more than he was. He somehow manages to keep going all the way through. When he's right at the door of Mount Doom, he keeps going. He is so steadfast in all of this, and I think we do have to take our hats off to him and just say, but for Frodo, yes, but for Sam, but for Frodo, this would not have succeeded. Sam recognized in himself he was not the person who was there to carry. It wasn't for him to carry the ring. It was for Frodo to carry the ring, and that's for a reason. And because he was the person who could just keep going. And there's, I think, there's a dignity in the way that he just kept on putting one foot in front of another, all that way, and also his pity was there. He was he had some attributes that I think are often overlooked. His pity towards Gollum, his compassion there. He understood. He saw Smeagol there and understood that, they're but for the grace of Aruluvatar Gowai, he could see that was where he could be heading. He could see the impact that the ring had on Gollum. He was wise as well in many ways. So there's so many good points about him. But yeah, he has been definitely overlooked, I think, within the fandom for a very long time. Let's go to a question from Feck Eric Schmidt saying the Well-Told Tale looks great. Lots of awesome books on there. I'm glad you discovered it. Let's go to a question from Catherine Furseth saying, "Hi Robert, when told the story about the ring by Gandalf in the books, Frodo is left in charge of deciding himself what to do. He seems reluctant, seeking for ways to avoid going away to safeguard the ring, but comes to the conclusion that he needs to leave in order for the Shire to be safe. There doesn't seem to be much of a concrete plan. How does fate, chance, and luck play into Tolkien's work? We're told that even the wise, among them Gandalf, cannot see how things will end. Is there a great plan or fate for individuals and worlds in Tolkien?" Well, yeah, there clearly is some overarching plan in this. We have a god who does intervene. He does leave alone quite a lot, but he does intervene at important moments. So there is all of that. Gandalf is not there, and this is specific reply to your point. Gandalf is not there and has been very specifically commissioned to not be there to do the hard work himself. He cannot go in there and say, "All right, give me the ring, I'll take it." That's not his role. His role is to advise and encourage. So what he was doing with Frodo was not, he wasn't holding back. He was saying, this is going to be very dangerous. You've got the world's most dangerous evil magical object in your possession. If you start heading out with it, then there's going to be lots of problems in your way. But I will be with you. Let's figure this out. The fact that he lets Frodo decide is and come to the conclusion that he has to do this is very clear in showing Gandalf's character, because you couldn't imagine if it were the other way around, somebody like Sauron would just order somebody to do something or do it himself. Gandalf is taking a step back, explaining everything, and then letting Frodo decide. So I think that is a different model of leadership that's going on there. I touched on it earlier, but this Gandalf is very clear in his mind that Frodo was meant to have the ring. And then later on, when we get to the Council of Elrond also becomes very clear in his mind that Frodo was meant to have the ring. It's probably worth, just as a sort of an addendum to all of that, just saying, I don't think Gandalf thought he was going to be leaving Frodo to do all this on his own. He was wanting to stay close to the Shire. This is again in that opening kind of sequence. So he comes back and talks to Frodo and says, okay, let's throw it in the fire. Oh no, it is the One Ring. This is all the problems we got. And then they come up with this plan, and Frodo says, well, I think it'd be a bit weird if I suddenly went now. Everybody would be suspicious and start talking. And Gandalf says, yep, that's fair enough. Let's leave it till my birthday. Let's and I'll let everybody know I'm going to move back home to where I came from originally. They came up with this whole elaborate plan. And Gandalf basically says, okay, great. Let's go with that. I'm going to sit here in Bag End for the next few months, but I will be close by. And so he was expecting to be there. He basically said, if I'm not, then, head off anyway, but he was expecting to be there. It was only when he went out, he went to the Sarn Ford, which was where Aragorn's Rangers were, got some intelligence from them, and started hearing dark rumors about things going on in the south and east. Basically heard Sauron was on the move. Rumors about the Black Riders, and he sort of went off to investigate. And that's where the problems were, because at that point, he then ran into Radagast. Radagast told him that Saruman wanted him, and then he got detained. So that all should not have happened. According to Gandalf's original plan, Gandalf should have been with him. He was not planning on leaving them to do all of this on his own. Even so, he basically let Aragorn, who was his right-hand man, keep an eye out for Frodo and so. Let's just having a quick flick through. Kulnitsky's saying Frodo is a noble young hobbit used to giving orders. Yeah, he is. I mean, I don't know. Noble is probably the wrong way of putting it. But upper middle class, definitely. He had staff. Let's put it that way. One angry pagan saying, "Do you think that the Baggins line was blessed by Iluvatar? Such as has happened with various other renowned families?" No, I don't think blessed is quite the right way of saying it. I did a video ages ago called something like "What's So Special About the Baggins Family?" And the conclusion I kind of came to was that Gandalf chose Bilbo because, and he says this, is because he wanted a mixture of the stolidness of the Bagginses and the more adventurous Tookish side. And that was what Bilbo was. He was exactly the right mix of somebody who was going to be able to just keep on going, but also be adventurous. So that was what he was looking for. Does this mean that the family were particularly blessed? Well, they were meant to have the ring. And that is the kind of, it's almost as if, I wouldn't say that they were blessed and so the ring came to them. It was almost like Iluvatar managed to make sure that the ring got to the right person. That's the way that I would say it. The Lady Eternal. I often wonder how things would have been different if the company had decided to reclaim Belegost instead of Erebor. How do you think that have influenced Frodo if they had, and would it have affected the ring quest? I mean, I'm just trying to think about whether there'll be a particular impact. If you go to Unfinished Tales, you'll find a really fascinating chapter there. And Unfinished Tales, incidentally, is the Tolkien book I tend to recommend to people after you've read Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings and want to know where to go next. A lot of people jump straight to the Silmarillion, but I think Unfinished Tales is a great place to start. The other thing I would add actually is The Fall of Numenor, the most recent one edited by Brian Sibley, is really good if you're interested in the Second Age in particular. But Unfinished Tales has got just a whole series of chapters of sort of random things from Tolkien, edited by Christopher Tolkien. One of those random things is Gandalf in the first person explaining his perspective on the background to the quest of Erebor, the plot of The Hobbit. And he basically comes to, he's trying to work out a problem because he knows that Sauron is starting to move again. And he knows that at some point there's going to be a war. And you have the dragon Smaug over in Erebor, which is a problem. Not because he thinks that they will be allies, Smaug and Sauron, but that they naturally will work together. So if Sauron is going out and starting to attack people in the south, Smaug will naturally go out and start attacking people in the north, and that will divert attention. And that also, the fact that he's there prevents the dwarves from holding that base, so they do not have that. So that whole area no longer has a strong defensive structure there. So Gandalf was trying to work out, how do I solve this problem? At which point he runs into Thorin on the road in Bree, and then they have these conversations, and Thorin's thinking about, how do I get Erebor back? And that's when they come up with the plan. And so the way I would come at this is by saying, it's not, what if they decided to reclaim somewhere else? It's a matter of, and Tolkien, I think, is quite clear through Gandalf, this was a chance encounter that was fateful, a fateful encounter between Gandalf and Thorin. That was supposed to be. And these kind of fateful encounters, the implication is that this wasn't just a random thing that happened. This was Eru Ilúvatar intervening in a subtle way to make something happen, in the same way that he kind of intervened, making sure that Bilbo found the ring. The ring wanted to be found, but it was Bilbo who found it. That kind of thing this is an actual intervention. So it's not. This is one of those ones where, as much as I love games of What If, the entire structure of Tolkien's world depends on this not being the case, because this was not manufactured, but this was part of the ineffable plan. And the bit of What If that I will happily go down is that what if that hadn't happened? What if Gandalf, say, hadn't managed to persuade Thorin that he should take Bilbo? Because Gandalf had this moment of insight, foresight, that if Bilbo went with them, then it would succeed. If Bilbo didn't, then it would fail. So what if Thorin decided against taking Bilbo? And Smaug wasn't killed, and Erebor wasn't reclaimed. Well, when you get to the War of the Ring, you suddenly get a very, very different scenario, because the focus, in terms of the bigger war that's happening, the focus we have is very much on the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, what happens in Rohan, that kind of theatre. But while that was happening, another massive orc army was going up and attacking Erebor, the Lonely Mountain, the area around Lake Town. They were going up there. Still more orcs based in Mirkwood were attacking Lothlorien. Those battles, the good guys did win, but what would have been the difference if there hadn't been dwarves there in the Lonely Mountain? What would have been the difference if instead of that there was a dragon who was going out and breathing fire on everybody? Huge. That would have turned the tide of the battle in the north without a shadow of doubt. And even after Sauron had been defeated, if Smaug was still there, Smaug would still have been posing a threat. So lots and lots of lives would have been lost, is basically the conclusion I would come to. Martin S. What does claiming actual ownership of the ring mean, as opposed to simply carrying it? It makes sense that it would indicate that the bearer is far more affected. Sauron noticed Frodo, but maybe that was putting the ring on. Yeah, so Sauron doesn't notice Frodo as much as it sort of is implied in the films. In the books, this is. The sort of ownership of it is, I think it's not as clear a dividing line as we probably would think. It's not so much of the I hereby claim this as mine and all the power of it. The ring, when it is in your possession, will slowly be tempting you, will be slowly taking control in a way. That's what happened with Gollum. That's what happened with Bilbo. That's what happened with Frodo. Sam, I think most wonderfully, we actually see this happening with Sam. When Sam has the ring for a brief time, you can actually read his thoughts. I'd highly recommend you go and do it if you're interested in this. You can hear his thoughts, and he starts to think about because it's Sam, obviously, is like, I could be the greatest gardener in the world. I could have this beautiful garden. Everybody would love this. And he has a few other slightly wilder thoughts, but that is where it starts. It's a temptation. And then before you know it, you are using the power of the ring. Frodo does do this. He uses the power of the ring towards the very end when he's in Mordor on Gollum, and it then takes him over towards the very end. So it's not a matter of I hereby claim this. Gollum, Bilbo had no idea exactly what this ring was. They had no idea that this was a ring of such great power that they could do amazing things with it, which was good, particularly for Bilbo. But it meant that they both seemed to have just thought, I put this on, I go invisible. That's great. And that was kind of the limit of their power. Bilbo, bless him, it's often overlooked, but he doesn't seem to get these grandiose dreams and visions. I think this says a huge amount about his character, is that he keeps the ring close to him. He puts it on more than he should do, and yet it never seems to cross his mind, if I stay here, I could run the Shire. I could be in charge. He actively starts planning retiring to Rivendell, so this doesn't have as big an effect on him. But yeah, putting the ring on, particularly in Mordor, did seem to sort of obviously attract Sauron's attention. The ring, and this is a technicality, it wasn't that it made you invisible. It took you to the plane of the unseen is probably the best way of saying it. It took you to a different sort of realm, which is where the Nazgul were, which is why Frodo could see them properly. The Juggernaut. What is it about hobbits that the ring's power is muted, where more powerful characters are seduced almost immediately? This is to do, it's to do with the lust for power. The ring is about power, and that's where the hobbits come in, because the hobbits have very simple dreams. They do not seek to rule. They do not seek to invade other places. They do not seek to do much other than live a nice and happy and good life. So it's that humility. It's that lack of drive for taking over other places that is the problem, or is good for them. So each race is slightly different. Dwarves are less affected by the rings of power that Sauron gave them than he was expecting. Rings were made for elves. The rings of power were made for elves. The One Ring was made for Sauron. And so it was made for him and to make more powerful the things he was already powerful at. That was the idea. So when he had the ring, he became more powerful. But hobbits started off not very powerful. So actually it wasn't multiplying out any of their sort of negative traits already. Could Smell put on the ring? Somebody, I didn't see who it was in the chat, say, M. Dizzle. It's a good thing we never found out, I think is probably the best way of saying that. Let's say, Mattia just saying, I want a second to appreciate that I'm doing a stream series on the kings and queens of Westeros. So the list of the streams goes Aegon the First, Rhaenys and Visenya, Frodo Baggins, Aenys, and then Maegor. Yeah, I'm interspersing, I think, kings and queens of Westeros with characters in the Lord of the Rings. So those are the two series I'm doing at the moment. George R.R. Tolkien. Salutations, Robert. Salutations to you too, sir. My question is about Frodo's decision to keep Gollum alive after they've reached Mount Doom. Was it because he saw himself and how the ring has manipulated them both? Or is it because Gandalf told him he had an important role yet to play? Or neither, and he just felt sorry for how pathetic he was? Well, before, I think there are two parts to this. There's before they reached Mount Doom. I think all of those things mattered. I think that Frodo's pity was huge. I think he saw in Gollum what he could become. He had empathy for him, and he was echoing Bilbo's pity. I think, yes, he also did have this thought that Gandalf had said to him that Gollum had a role to play. When you get to, and this doesn't come up so much in the film, but in the book, when you read it, it's like, whoa, that's pretty amazing. Gollum attacks Frodo and Sam when they reach Mount Doom. And basically, Frodo suddenly, he'd been there, Sam was having to carry him, he couldn't go a step further, out of energy. Gollum attacks, trying to take the ring from him, and suddenly Frodo gets this massive surge of strength, and he fights him off, and he's standing over him, and Gollum's there kind of whimpering, and you see this through Sam's eyes, and he suddenly sees it almost through this kind of spiritual lens, and he sees Frodo as this huge figure in white with the one ring around his neck, like a ring of fire, and out of that comes this voice which kind of basically threatens Gollum, or possibly curses him, depending on your perspective. But at that point, the way he is described, pardon me, at that point, the way Frodo is described is untouchable by pity, which is deliberate wording on Tolkien's part. It was not, he no longer had pity at that moment in time. Sam kind of intervenes and basically says, you go up to Mount Doom, I will deal with Gollum. And that's the moment when Sam's pity comes in, because all through this we have Bilbo's pity saved Gollum, then we get Sam's pity saved Gollum. Then we get Frodo's pity saving Gollum, and then Sam is suspicious all the way through. Understandably, great-hearted, wonderful-hearted Sam is so protective of Frodo, and he can see that Gollum wants to attack Frodo. He can see all of these things, but suddenly, right at the very end, that's when Sam's pity kicks in. So the pity which allowed Gollum at the very end to get up to Frodo was not just Bilbo's pity, it was Bilbo's pity plus Frodo's pity plus Sam's pity. So why did Frodo spare him at the very end? Because basically Sam intervened and he went off at that point. Question from, I think I had another one. Sadie Allen saying, I'm a lifelong Tolkien fan and have recently discovered your lovely channel. Why didn't Radagast return to Valinor? I've always wondered. Thank you. Well, welcome, first of all. In terms of Radagast, we're told that the only one of the Istari who stayed true to their mission was Gandalf. So Gandalf was the only one who returned. Now, some Saruman not staying true to his mission meant he went evil. We know this. The two blue wizards we don't hear about. Tolkien literally only does a few sentences about, but the clear implication is that they also fell. Radagast, it seems to be something slightly different. Radagast loved Middle-earth. He just really enjoyed being in Middle-earth, and he seems to have... So he disappeared. And when after the fact Saruman had manipulated him, and he presumably realized at that point that had happened, he disappeared. And when a Maier wishes to disappear, particularly one like him who is a master of hues and colors and things like that, basically he could just disappear. And it actually wasn't, although yes, he did not stay true to his mission, we have a little sympathy for him, because the reason he didn't stay true to his mission was because he cared so much about Middle-earth. He loved Middle-earth so much. And he, in my mind, almost became slightly closer to Tom Bombadil, in that he didn't want to get involved in all of this politics and war and things like he just wanted. He loved nature and he wanted to be close to it. So that's why. And perhaps if he turned up, perhaps he could have gone back. We don't know. But he decided not to. He decided he'd been sent there to be one of the Astari, to be supporting and advising and helping the children of Iluvatar, the free peoples of Middle-earth, against Sauron. But he just basically gone away from that to just enjoy Middle-earth. Let's go to another question here somewhere. Das Böse Fleisch saying, I found your channel last week and spent hours watching your material. Well, welcome. That's really kind. I only knew the movies before that. I wonder how awesome Butterbeer's beer would be with the aid of the ring. It would be awesome. I don't know whether you picked up on this. I'm guessing you probably did because of the question. But there's one of my favorite details in The Lord of the Rings is that Gandalf's obviously really annoyed with Butterbeer. Bielemeier is one of my favorite characters. He's forgetful, and he forgot to pass on the letter, get the letter sent on to Frodo. But when Gandalf discovers that Frodo had arrived there and Bielemeier had basically looked after him and protected him and sent him off on his way, suddenly Gandalf loves him. And Gandalf blesses his beer for 7 years. And when they come back, the hobbits and Gandalf, and stop off again and go, oh, this is nice beer. How good would it have been if he'd had that? It would have been amazing beer, absolutely. But I suspect that the prices would have been very high. Although the One Ring can make you incredibly powerful, it also makes you incredibly greedy. So I suspect that he would have set up a chain of pubs going across the land, pushing everybody else out of business, raised the prices very high, and made the whole thing a thoroughly miserable experience. That's my take. But it's a good thing that Bielemeier never got the One Ring. Incidentally, one of the reasons I love Bielemeier, he's one of two characters that Tom Bombadil speaks highly of, and both of them come across incredibly well in The Lord of the Rings. Not so well, actually, in the films, but in the books. The first is Farmer Maggot, who looks after the hobbits. He feeds them, he protects them, he sends them on their way. And Bielemeier, basically, we hear he liked Farmer Maggot. He got on with him. He would often paddle upstream, go spend some time with Farmer Maggot and just enjoy life. And the other person was Bielemeier Butterbeer, and he called him, I think it was something like a worthy landlord or something along those lines. But it was just like, yeah, you can trust that guy. He's a good man. Because again, Bielemeier has that same vibe that Tom Bombadil does. He has this vibe of he's not getting involved in the politics of the wider world. He is just enjoying the world we have. He's got this pub that has great beer, looks after people. He's even thought to make sure that there's rooms that the right size with the right type of windows for hobbits. He's creating a wonderful, enjoying the world kind of atmosphere where he is. So if Tom Bombadil says you're all right, then I think you're all right. Let's go to a question from Martin S. Thank you very much. Picking up a question from the Brothers Kryn. Hi there. Bonjour, the Brothers Kryn. The relationship Sauron has with his ring is akin to that of Morgoth and Arda, or Melian and Luthien. This sort of discussion, though, is my fave, which is why a few of my videos are focused on this. Well, yes, it is. So there is, for those who wish to dive deep into this, Morgoth is the original big baddie. Melkor Morgoth is the original big baddie of Tolkien's Legendarium. Sauron was his lieutenant, and so when we get to stories of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, he is the big baddie because Morgoth has already been defeated. But where did Sauron get his idea for creating the One Ring from? It appears as if this is perhaps from Morgoth, because there is, if you go into the history of Middle-earth, which is this epic, it's for the ultra Tolkien nerds, but this epic 12-part series that Christopher Tolkien did, pulling together so much of his father's notes, random scribblings, essays, whatever, into some kind of order for us. One of them is called Morgoth's Ring, and one of the themes there is that in the same way that Sauron poured all of his malice and power and hatred into that one ring, Morgoth did the same kind of thing, but he did it not just to a ring, but to the entire planet. And so he corrupted the entire planet. And this is why evil can never be 100% defeated in Tolkien's world. This is sort of like, again, Tolkien obviously was a very strong Christian, a Catholic Christian, and he did believe in the earth as being corrupted is probably the wrong word. I'm sure any Christian theologians in the chat will give me the right word for this. But it was not a perfect world. It's an imperfect world, and evil is in there ever since the fall. Evil is always around the world. But in Tolkien's created world, it is the same kind of feel. Tolkien uses lots of different kind of imagery for this. He uses shadow. He uses a tree that, it will grow again somewhere else. You can never fully get rid of it. This is the kind of feel we've got. So although I've explained it in terms of like Sauron did this, Morgoth did that on a bigger scale, to Tolkien it's the other way around. Morgoth did this and Sauron kind of followed by doing that on a much smaller scale. Melian the Maya is a fascinating character. If you've never come across her, she was a Maya, so at the same kind of power level as Gandalf, Sauron, Saruman, people like that. She lived in the first age of Middle-earth. She was married to an elf, and they had a daughter, Luthien, who you may know from the tale of Beren and Luthien. And she did gain a lot of power, therefore, from her Maya ancestry. This idea that you get a person who's pushed their power into someone or something is echoed a lot through Tolkien, and Tolkien does do this a lot, echoing the same kind of themes. It's not the same in each of these different instances. There are big differences, but he echoes these thoughts all the way through his history. Let's go to A Reflect Rambling asking a question for Libby Rose Waite. What do we know, or do you think, about the Rangers of the North, beyond being descendants of the Dunedain and Strider as an individual? Well, we don't know huge amounts about. They are a dispossessed people, basically. What we have is you had two great kingdoms at the beginning of the Third Age. These are basically successor kingdoms to Numenor. We have Gondor in the south and we have Arnor in the north. And the Witch King makes it his aim to destroy these kingdoms. And Arnor he does. It takes a long time, lots of different approaches, but eventually the whole kingdom does get destroyed. What is left is just a wreck. And the heir does survive, as do a few other people who are there and they come from Numenorian descent. And the thing, Tolkien doesn't labor this point much, but it's actually quite ridiculous when you think about it, is that these people, what do? There is now no longer a kingdom for them. This has got destroyed. There are no people there. The land is empty and desolate. What are they going to do? They could try and restart their kingdom. They could go, well, we'll head down to Gondor and we'll join up with them because, there are distant cousins. They could have moved to somewhere else. They could have done lots of different things. But what they decided to do was say, this is our land and we're going to keep on protecting the people who are here, which includes the Shire and the hobbits who were there and the king had promised to look after them. So even though the hobbits didn't know anything about it, the Rangers were there protecting them. And this is actually incredibly noble when you start to think about it. They could have done anything, but they decided, you know what? This is our role. This is what we've committed to. This is what we will do. Generation after generation after generation, even though we do not have a home of our own, we are looking, and the people we're looking after do not even know that we're there. We're going to do our job. So it is noble. It is great. It is supported by Elrond. It has to be said. So their sort of unofficial home base was Rivendell, and when I say unofficial home base, the heir. It wasn't just Aragorn. It was all of the heirs. They were fostered by Elrond in Rivendell. And Elrond kept hold of the instruments of power, the great things like the sword that was broken, the scepter of Annuminas, the symbols of their kingship. I think I had one more question that I missed. Libby Rose White. That was the question I just answered. Okay, that's. I think that's me caught up in the chat. I will take this as a moment, though, to say, moderators, thank you. I have some amazing moderators who do wonderful work. If you are watching this live, please show the moderators a little bit of love in the chat. I would hugely appreciate it. The other people I would love to say thank you to are my patrons. Thank you. That's why I frame these live streams around questions from my patrons. That's just one of a number of different benefits I have from my patrons. If you would like to show your support for this channel, the very best way to do that is by joining my Patreon. There is a link down in the description. Thank you very much. Let's go to a question from Martin S. saying, if Gimli's axe had been made by Eru Ilúvatar, then the One Ring would have been destroyed when Gimli struck it, movie only. Yeah, so that moment when Gimli hit the One Ring, that is a movie only thing. That wasn't in the books, but I actually don't hate it. It was quite in line with Gimli's character, and I think it showed he, more than any of the other members of the Fellowship, seemed to be unaffected by the ring. He is the, pardon me, he is, I think I'm right in saying, he is the only person in the history of the Ring who has personally actively tried to destroy the One Ring. Show only, film only, but I think that says a lot. Nobody else. Isildur never actively tried to destroy the Ring. Certainly Gollum didn't, certainly Bilbo didn't, Sam didn't, Frodo went all the way to Mordor, but then at the very last moment didn't. When Gollum did destroy the ring, it was an accident, basically. It wasn't him actively trying to destroy it. So the only person in either canon who ever actively tried to destroy the ring was Gimli. And as I say, I kind of like that. But when you say if it had been made by Uru Iluvatar, yeah, absolutely. Maura Lee, hi again there, Maura, saying just some love and support. Hugely appreciate that. Andrew Roberts saying, hey, Robert, first question as a patron. Welcome. Long-time listener, but just now supporting you on Patreon. My question is something I'm sure might start a war in the comments, but who is the hero of The Lord of the Rings, in your opinion, Frodo or Samwise? Now, I don't think it will, well, I hope it won't produce a war in the comments, but this is something that Tolkien was very clear in his mind. He obviously understood how story worked, and he understood the difference between protagonist and hero. Now, the protagonist or protagonists are people who drive the action of the story forward. They're the people who do the things that make the story happen. So in The Lord of the Rings, we get a lot of them. Frodo's definitely one. Aragorn's one. Gandalf's one. We get antagonists as well, whose actions are opposing the protagonists. The hero is a distinct character. The hero is probably one of the protagonists, but not necessarily. The hero, you can see the hero's journey because their story starts when the story starts, and when their story ends, that's when the story ends. They're the people whose arc we are being invited to actively follow and in our hearts support. So Tolkien structured this with Sam as the hero. And what I mean by that is the story starts really effectively. We've got a couple of chapters of prologue with the party and things like that. The story effectively starts with the revelation about what the One Ring is and what Frodo has to do. Gandalf's there, throw the ring into the fire. This is what this says. These are, this is who Sauron is. This is what has to happen. It needs to be destroyed. All of the rest of it. At that point, that's the moment a character gets revealed who is Sam. He's there outside doing his gardening, and then Gandalf finds him and hoiks him in the window. You remember the scene. More crucially, the story ends when Sam's story ends. It's been noted many times that Tolkien could have ended his story at various different points. The kind of the cinematic end would have been perhaps when the ring itself is destroyed in the Cracks of Doom, and that's it. Sauron's empire comes crashing down. Maybe the kind of the Star Wars Last Hope kind of ending when they're all getting their medals. That could have been the ending when you get, no, my friends, you bow to no one, and they're all being recognized, and Aragorn and Arwen marry. That could have been an ending as well. You could have had an ending just after the hobbits return home to the Shire. You could have had an ending there. You get the scouring of the Shire. The last problem has been dealt with. They're there now. You could also have had an ending when the ship goes. The White Ship takes Frodo away, as well as Gandalf and Galadriel and Elrond and Bilbo. When they all go off, that could have very well been an ending there. That's not when, none of those occasions is when Tolkien decided to end his story. He ended his story when Sam gets home. That's when the story ends, not at any of those other points. Well, he says, I'm back. And that's it. The end. Full stop. Period. End of the story. The story ends when Sam returns home and he's there in his loving family. That's the moment. And that is the hero. In this instance, that's the hero's arc that takes him through to there. And as if that weren't obvious in the structural sense, Tolkien, he did say in one of his letters, in the top of my head, I think it was 181, but don't quote me on that one. I will quote, because I put it down here, what he says. He says, the simple rustic love of Sam and his Rosie is absolutely essential to the study of the chief hero's character. And his there is Sam, the chief hero. And that, I think, is, he mentions this again another couple of times. He talks about Sam, rather than Frodo, as effectively taking on the Bilbo character. So in pure technical terms, the hero is Sam. That there are many heroes, but he is the chief hero of this story. Dan Lampkin, who were the Woses or the Druidine, really? Were they humans, human variants, something akin to Neanderthal? Are they related to hobbits in any way? Thank you, love your work. Well, thank you very much. So these characters, I'm not sure that they really appear in the films, but in the books they're wonderful. So they live in a forest, and basically they are the people who they exist partway between Rohan and Gondor, and the most important time for them, really, in the story is when we have the army of Rohan is rushing to try and get to the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. We know they have to get there in time, but Sauron obviously knows they have to get there in time, and he dispatches a load of orcs to guard the one road to make sure that they can't get through. At which point there's like, well, we could go through the forest, and we can't because the Druidine are there. Who are the Druidine? Again, I think there's an essay in Unfinished Tales which goes through, so I won't bore you too much with all of that. But basically, they're human-like, but very clearly have their own culture, and they come to an agreement. They can come through bypassing this army, but then humans will kind of leave them alone. And there are two places Aragorn, we're not told huge amounts of details about how Aragorn ruled, but we are told that he gave complete independence over two places, just let them rule themselves, the Shire and the Druidine in their the Woes in their forest. He just said, that's yours now. I'm not going to bother you there. You can have that land. Who are they? Well, we get lots of speculation. Basically, it seems that they are probably, this is my guess, this is based a bit on what Tolkien has said, humans started off in the east. That's where they first appeared. Some of them stayed where they were. Some of them went south. Some of them headed off west. The ones that headed off west, we then kind of know as the Edain. There's the three tribes of the Edain. These are the people who sided with the elves against Morgoth, and then they got rewarded by being given Numenor. So they all go off to Numenor. But some of them just like did a little arc around the bottom and didn't quite get to reach those wars, but then kind of cut themselves off. That's who those people are. Let's go to a question from a correspondent saying, did I miss the question by Curtis Franks. I may have done. If I did, apologies. I do sometimes miss questions. If one of the moderators wants to tag me and put that in the chat, I will pick that one up. Thus, Bursa Fleisch saying, are there standalone magic rings? Would the ring made by Sauron still work even after he's gone and the One Ring destroyed? Are there standalone magic rings? Theoretically, yes. For those who don't know what the ring made by Sauron is, we're not given huge amounts of information about this, but we know that, the ring made by Saruman, we know that Saruman became obsessed with ring magic. And when Gandalf meets him in The Lord of the Rings, he notices he is wearing a ring, a new flashy ring, a ring of power. Now, the implication is he made this himself. Is this therefore tied in with Sauron? Probably not. This was probably tied in with Saruman himself. Are there other magic rings? Well, there's no reason to think that there aren't. They are what we had going on in pardon me, with Celebrimbor was not just the rings of power. This was hundreds of years they were doing forging of rings. 300 years Anatar was there with them. It's only at the end they started forging what we think of as the rings of power. Before that, they created a lot of magic rings that Gandalf describes as essays in the craft. It's that he thinks, to start with, that's what he thinks Bilbo's ring is. He thinks that this is probably just one of those little trinkets that Celebrimbor made before he went on to the really impressive stuff. So that's what Gandalf's thought is. Are there others? I have I don't know, this is probably as close to a tinfoil theory as I have about Tolkien, because Tolkien didn't say this, but it makes absolute sense, is the Whites in the Barrow Downs had rings. And I have a feeling that we get the Witch King who created these Whites. I think he used ring magic for them. Now, the rings are highlighted a couple of times. It's not just like, and they happen to be wearing rings. They are highlighted a couple of times. And so it clearly is quite important to their character that they have got those rings. So are there other rings of power? First of all, the question, would the ring made by Saruman still work even after he's gone and the One Ring destroyed? I think my best understanding, Tolkien didn't give us a full breakdown about how his magic system worked, but Sauron being destroyed and his One Ring being destroyed is probably entirely irrelevant to Saruman's ring. But when Saruman was gone, yes, that would have probably affected that. Are there other magic rings? Almost certainly out there, but not as great as the rings of power. Let's go have a quick flick through. I'm trying to find. Somebody said I missed a question, which I can't see for the moment. I'll have a very quick flick through. Apologies if you're watching this one back later. See whether I can see any more questions that I've missed. No, I'm afraid I can't. It might have gone off the top. So yeah, if one of the... Curtis Franks, I see it now. Apologies there. Picking up a question for Dara Chapman. Thank you very much. Saying, I know Tolkien was very Christian but hated allegory. You talked a lot about pity. Thoughts about pietas? I'm not entirely sure I understand that question. In terms of, he hates allegory, and he does talk a lot about pity. It's probably worth saying that I think pity, in the way that Tolkien uses it, has lost a little bit in modern-ish translation. I think we would think of it, we would use the word compassion or something more. I mean, if you were ever like in the 80s thinking of like the A-Team with I pity the fool kind of thing, that's not the feel that Tolkien's going for this with this. This is about suddenly having compassion, having mercy on someone. That's the kind of feel he's going for. And he doesn't like allegory. He cordially dislikes it in all its forms. So this is not him trying to show some element of God or anything like that. But what he clearly is trying to do is show how powerful it is. So I think that's the what we've got going on there. Right, let's go with Urias Tosh saying the rings that do exist in the world are magical but not of great power. That summarizes a lot more pithily than what I was saying. Thank you very much. Matthew Hawkins saying, Dear Robert, in the light of Amazon paying millions to buy the rights to produce the Rings of Power, could you ever foresee the circumstance in the future where the Tolkien estate would allow new books to be written in the Middle-earth universe? Gandalf's secret visits to Dol Guldur and Aragorn burning the Corsair fleet in Umbar would be brilliant short stories. Well, they would. Absolutely, I have absolutely no doubt about that whatsoever. Would the Tolkien estate ever allow more books to be written in the Tolkien universe? So this is pure speculation. My first guess is probably no. I think that they probably like the idea, given the history that they've had, they like the idea of the Tolkien canon just being the Tolkien canon. And with the Rings of Power, this is the first time that they've allowed new stories to be told in Tolkien's world. Before this, yes, adaptations did slightly different things. So Peter Jackson's stories are not 100% true to what's in the books, but they were trying to tell the same story. Season 1 of The Rings of Power was trying to create new stories in the gaps in Tolkien's world. So that's a big shift, which is the only little sort of asterisk I would do to what I started to say. The one thing I would say about copyright, which is, for those who don't know, the working assumption is that Tolkien's writings will be covered under UK copyright law. What that means is that things are copyright for 70 years after the writer's death. Now, Tolkien died in 1973, which, if my maths is correct, takes it up to somewhere around 2044, because it's the 1st of January the next year that things become public domain. So we've got about 20 years or so before that. But as is always the question you have to ask yourself is, if with just a few years to go, would the Tolkien estate suddenly go on a mad cash grab for the last few moments when they could get money out of this? I don't know. That's certainly not the feel that they've had thus far. But there is a tweak, and as is with everything with the rights to Tolkien, is that we simply do not know the answer to these things, because yes, plain-faced, that's what it is. But would that be the same under US copyright law or Canadian or Australian? Would that be different elsewhere? Yes, because they've got slightly different rules. So we may find that it's not quite as clear-cut as that. And then what about things like the Silmarillion? Silmarillion, nobody disputes this is Tolkien's work, but it was edited, and the final form of it was created by Christopher Tolkien, who only died a couple of years ago. So one could argue that the copyright for that and everything in the history of Middle-earth and everything in the the three great stories, Beren Luthien, Fall of Gondolin, Children of Húrin, those are all under Christopher Tolkien's copyright, so they've got another 7 decades to go. It starts getting very complicated. As with everything with Tolkien and rights to do stuff, it's actually, even the people you would expect to know the answer to this do not know all of the answers. These are the kinds of things which would have to go down to a court of law to decide exactly. Would they allow new stories, written stories? I think it's much, much, much more likely that they would allow more TV shows to be going that way, which is bringing me around to a thing. This is your regular reminder that Amazon did not just buy the rights to make a TV show. They bought the rights to make TV shows, plural. Whether they're going to do more than one, I don't know. But just keep an eye out for this, because if they are going to announce another TV show, and they were pitched lots of different ideas before they went with the one that they went with. They were pitched lots of different ideas, including some of these. Well, one of the favorites we were told was young Aragorn. That would have been possible. And it is still possible. It's very possible still. We might, in a few years' time, have a young Aragorn TV show. What your views are on that, I'd love to know. But I think it's much more likely that we will have a TV show or a film about some of these other things than we would have original writing. And I think, which writer would consider themselves up to the challenge of actively writing the first non-Tolkien written things in Tolkien's world? I don't know. Let's go to, do I have well, I'm just having a quick flick through the chat. Urias Tosh saying 2045, expect my first new canon novel. Yeah, I think that's I think a lot of people, if the right is there to suddenly do it, I expect a lot of that. The classic example of this is something like Sherlock Holmes. If you want to see what something in the public domain looks like, Sherlock Holmes, we get a new Sherlock Holmes film every few years at the moment, and have done for a long time, because it's public domain. Anyone can do anything they want, and they don't have to stick to canon on it. They can take it any which way they want. Carl Kosnak saying, this is picking up from that question I wasn't sure about earlier, saying Pieta equals pity equals pathos. A Pieta is also a popular form of classical sculpture in which Mary is depicted holding Christ after he's been taken off the cross. Michelangelo's is the most famous. Okay, well, thank you very much. I was not aware of that. Is this pity that Tolkien uses, is this sort of referencing across to that? Mary holding Christ after he's been taken off the cross. I don't think so. I think that at least not in an obvious way. Tolkien did talk about his Catholic faith and how this did influence his work, and he recognizes, although he never wavered from his view that he disliked and did not use allegory, he did accept the fact that no writer can ever truly, he didn't use these words, but no writer can ever truly divorce themselves from their own worldviews and experiences. Of course they cannot. And so sometimes he does kind of acknowledge a few different things here and there. He specifically acknowledges the dead marshes as being probably reflective of some traumas that he had in the Battle of the Somme. Dead faces in puddles, horrific thoughts, but that's what that does seem to be from there. He did make a link between lembas and sort of communion wafers and things along those lines. He did recognize that, and manna from heaven as well. So, but he did not specifically, although he recognized pity as a very much a Christian virtue, as far as I'm aware, he never actually made that specific link. Having a quick flick through. Just trying to have people talk about the copyright. Kulnitsky saying, I really enjoyed Rings of Power, but was the story incomplete due to copyright issues? Yeah, I'm not going to get drawn into the Rings of Power and copyright issues, but just so everyone's aware of how that works. They still have rights to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, including the appendices to The Lord of the Rings. They do not have rights to the Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales, anything like that. What that means is complicated. So they cannot explicitly use things that are only in the Silmarillion. You see that very clearly in things like the intro bit of the first episode of The Rings of Power, when they're talking about basically all the background and how the Noldor came to Middle Earth, and it's such a cut down version that they use there. It's because an Ungoliant not there because they do not have access to the Silmarillion. Now, what they do have is ability to negotiate on a case-by-case basis with the Tolkien estate on whether they can do certain things and use certain things. But no, as it stands, they do not have access to the Silmarillion, and that does hinder what they can do with the Rings of Power. I would not put it beyond them to suddenly announce we've bought the rights to the Silmarillion. But the fact that they didn't get them to start with, and given that money is really no object for them, I think that this is much more a point of principle that these have not been given up. If you look on, and I really should ask at some point, the Tolkien Society on their FAQs, I randomly remember did have a question about will a TV show ever be made of the Silmarillion. It just simply says no, the Tolkien estate will not be giving away rights to it. And I don't know where that comes from. I genuinely don't know. I can't imagine they just made that up. So my assumption is that this is a decision by the Tolkien estate not to do so. The asterisk to that is that the Tolkien estate is not a static thing, and the Tolkien estate, until in terms of the literary estate, until just a few years ago, basically was Christopher Tolkien who was in charge of this, but now he's no longer there. Does that shift things and change things? Undoubtedly. Will that lead to a change in approach? Very possibly. Let's go to a question from Jules Holman saying, if hobbits crossbred with other free peoples of Middle-earth, which do you think they would couple with? Could you imagine a blend of hobbits and elves? Oh, wow. I mean, possibly. The thing is, elves don't... elves mate for life. And we only get 3 elf-human full relationships in the entire history of Tolkien's Legendarium. So this is incredibly rare. For the entire time that we know of the hobbits, there never was any of that. So potentially, yes, there is no real reason why a hobbit and an elf couldn't fall in love, but it would be the same deal because hobbits are sort of descendants from humans. As far as we can understand, it would be the same deal. The elf would have to give up on their immortality for it. Hobbits and humans makes a whole lot more sense in that. Dwarves seem to keep to themselves. Basically, there's a lot less interspecies mixing in the Lord of the Rings and Tolkien's Legendarium than there are in the kind of the successor franchises that are based loosely on what Tolkien introduced. There are many more half elves and half orcs and half halflings or whatever in D&D than there ever were in Tolkien's world. Question from Martin S. Is Frodo Baggins taller or shorter than Tyrion Lannister? Well, that's an excellent question. I mean, I think shorter, but I would have to go and double check that. I'm sure somebody in the chat, there's always somebody in the chat who's got, maybe could even Google this for their different heights. So I will pass on that one, but hopefully somebody in the chat will have a full answer on that one. I think that's me caught up in the chat, though. So let's go to a question from Martin Sierstrand saying, "Hi, Robert. I've been trying to figure out exactly what was unique about Mount Doom so that it was the only means of the One Ring's destruction. I have three basic ideas. Firstly, it's a matter of heat and temperature. That is, Mount Doom would be the only place left in Middle-earth hot enough to melt the ring. Gandalf's words to Frodo seem to say that, but I'm not sure that they can be taken that literally. Secondly, perhaps it's a matter of some supernatural power that would only be great enough there to break apart the ring's own supernatural power. Or thirdly, it's a matter of fate. So why only Mount Doom could destroy it? Well, Gandalf, you were referring to what Gandalf said to Frodo. Gandalf did talk about there are no dragons left now whose fire is strong enough to melt this. But I think he goes on and he says even back in the day, Encalagon, the Black Encalagon, the Great, the largest and first of the winged dragons, even his fires could not have done this. So it has to be, yes, there's a very practical, it has to be incredibly hot. But there are other volcanoes there in Middle-earth. I think there are two answers to this. The first is that perhaps they couldn't be sure. If they put it into another volcano, maybe it wouldn't fully destroy it. And even if it did, then would that have the effect that they want? Because the second point is that Orodruin is connected to Sauron in some way. This was, and I think actually your question, your follow-up question to this sort of covers this, saying, why did Mount Doom collapse when the One Ring was destroyed? For Barad-dûr, it makes sense as the Dark Tower or its foundations were made using the ring. However, Mount Doom was not made using the ring. So this was connected in some way. And we're not told all of the details of this. Again, Tolkien doesn't tell us all the details of his magic system. But the clear implication, I think, is that when Tolkien was doing the magic, which sort of imbued his power within the ring, the implication is that this also he had to use the forge, the means of making this. It wasn't just like, hey, I've just got a normal forge and then I'm just going to create a ring and then zoom, put my power into it. That's not how it is. The means of creating it had to therefore somehow be connected in with this process. That, I think, is the implication of what we read about this. We certainly know whenever Orodruin was start sort of billowing smoke and things like that, it's because Sauron is on the move again. It seems to be connected to him. So this means that the implication is that it has to go to Mount Doom because that is where it was forged, and therefore if you wish to not just physically destroy the ring but undo the magic that created the ring, then it has to go there. Tolkien didn't go through all of that detail, but that seems to be, from the little hints that we got dotted around, that seems to be what's going on with it. And that means, and that explains why the mountain collapsed effectively. It sort of kind of blew up because it was connected in with Sauron's power, and so with Sauron's power gone, it was also being destroyed. Your sort of second follow-up to that was, did Sauron forge a lot of other things there? So there was a road there from Parador, so presumably he visited it. Well, yes, we are told that he did forge things there. The only specific thing we're told that he forged there was the One Ring. I do wonder whether you have Grond, you'll remember it, this is what the battering ram that they took down the doors of Minas Tirith with. The doors of Minas Tirith were not just like ordinary cool gates. These were like proper hardcore, never been broken down gates. And Grond was, we're told, magical. So it had to be forged somewhere. So I do wonder whether that was forged there. Other things, I feel sure they were as well. But the only thing we're told was forged there was the One Ring. Callie Summers saying only 3 half-elf pairs or 3 that could share a fate. Okay, interesting clarification. So yeah, 3 pairings of elf and human. One obviously being the one that we know at the end, Aragorn and Arwen, but then we also get 2 back in the First Age. They then form the same family tree and come together to create, after a few generations, that's where Elrond and Elros, his twin brother, come from, which is why they get this choice. Do you wish to be counted as a human, or do you wish to be counted as an elf? And that choice gets passed down to Elrond's children. So he had that choice, but then it's also given to Arwen to decide what she wishes to do. So so that's what's we get 3 human elf matches. Let's go to a question from Maura Lee saying Frodo became the ring bearer and the ring ended up destroyed at the end of the trilogy. Frodo ended up sacrificing quite a lot in order to do so. Why did Gandalf allow this instead of giving Frodo a chance to have someone else bear the burden? When Frodo ended up severely injured and Elrond had to heal him, why couldn't he be allowed to live happily ever after? What do you think Tolkien was trying to teach us? Well, I think this comes back to what I was talking about earlier. I think that for Tolkien, he wanted to show that these kinds of things have an impact. From his own experience of going to war, coming back, this has an impact. You don't just get to live happily ever after. Yeah, he wanted people to live happily ever after, which is why he had Sam having his happily ever after with Rosie and his family in his garden. Frodo couldn't do that. So that, I think, is what he was trying to do. Gandalf did give Frodo basically free choice. But he sort of, if you want to look at it badly, kind of passively aggressively tried to say, you have to take it to Rivendell. But it was never Gandalf. Once he got it there, Gandalf did not say to Frodo, you now need to take it. There was this kind of awkward, if you remember in the Council of Elrond, there was this kind of awkward silence after, who's going to take the ring? And Bilbo's there going, oh, well, no, Bilbo, sit back down. You're not taking the ring. And then there was this kind of awkward silence, at which point Frodo then said, okay, I'll take it. So it was Frodo himself who actively chose to do that. The first bit, Gandalf was fully planning to go with him. So he would have backed himself against anyone else. Let's not forget he took on all of the Nazgul at Weathertop and survived. He's pretty powerful. So and there were the 5 of them or whatever it was there, all just when he was on his own. So Gandalf would have backed himself to protect Frodo. He wasn't hoping or planning or expecting Frodo to get that injured en route. Question from Dan Lamkin. Would hobbits have explored westward prior to the West March being added to the Shire in the Fourth Age? Were they familiar with the area prior to the founding of the Undertowers? Yeah, so when after the Lord of the Rings, the Aragorn became king. I was going to say king of everywhere. You know what I mean. So he then basically claimed the Shire as part of Arnor, his the Northern Kingdom, and then gave it freedom. And he gave it freedom with expanded borders. Now, the expanded borders were primarily expanded across to the west. Would the hobbits have known? Yes, they knew about those lands. They did. The hobbits did sort of beat the bounds. They were aware of things which were sort of on the edges, but there weren't really hobbits there because the further that way you went, the more elvish you got. So you get the towers there are elven towers, and that's where the elves go. A lot of them who were around, yes, some of the elves were heading west in order to get to the Grey Havens, to get on boats to head west, but some of them went to the towers, the three towers. One of those towers, which is just to the west of the Shire, had in it a palantir, and this was the palantir that was set up. You couldn't use it like others. It only looked west. It only looked towards the Undying Lands, and a lot of the elves would go there to look west, to see what was west. Most of the time, and in the books you'll find that Frodo and co, they run into, I think it's Geldir, who has that's where they were, I think, coming back from. And a lot of elves, they would see what was west, and then their heart would be filled with the sea longing, and they would head off west. So that's the sort of the idea. Did the hobbits know about it? Yes, they knew about it, but they sort of didn't go there because they didn't want to mix with the other people. Let's go to so Maura Lee, you also asked, you said that in the past I've said that Jon Snow over in the world of Ice and Fire is most like Frodo rather than Aragorn. Who could compare and contrast the characters of Jon Snow and his friendship with Sam Tarly with Frodo and his friendship with Sam Gamgee. And King's Road, you also asked, can I tell us how George R. R. Martin might echo Frodo's journey and final state through Jon's character arc? Yeah, so for those who haven't heard me say this before, this is one of, I try to resist crossovers where I don't think that they're applicable. But George R. R. Martin is a massive Tolkien fan, and he does borrow from writers that he loves, and I have become convinced over time that Jon Snow is being written as a kind of Aragorn character. He's not an exact match, but sort of like an Aragorn character, this long lost king who's been prophesied, who's going to come back and save the world and then rule wonderfully after that. That's how he's being written. But in reality, he's going to end up as being more of a kind of a Frodo character in the sense of what we've just been talking about, in the sense that he is going to be broken by this experience of saving the world. He is not going to be able to have his happy ever after. He is going to eventually have to leave the Seven Kingdoms in the same way that Frodo had to leave the Shire. He only hung around for a couple of years and then he had to go because he had to heal. Now, that I think is where Jon Snow's story arc is heading. I think that the fact that his best friend is Sam and Frodo's is Sam, I think is just this kind of small nod and a wink to us so that we can know where that's going. How might his story echo Frodo's journey? I think that's as simple as it is. It's not going to be an exact matching, at all. I think that he is going to save the Seven Kingdoms through his actions. Maybe it's not him personally doing all the things at the end, but he's going to do it. But it is going to break him as a person, what he has to do. Now, obviously on the TV show, spoilers if you haven't watched the TV show, but no, I think we're past that point now. Obviously on the TV show, he ends up killing Daenerys, which saves, in the TV show world, in the TV show canon, George R. R. Martin's been very clear, that's different to book canon, so we're not saying it's the same, but on the show canon, he killed Daenerys, which broke him as a person, because it saved the Seven Kingdoms, because she was gone all bad, but it broke him as a person, and he ended up heading north after it, beyond the wall, outside of the Seven Kingdoms, because he could not, he saved the Seven Kingdoms, but not for himself. And that is the kind of feel that I'm expecting at the end of A Song of Ice and Fire. Now, George R. R. Martin has written about this. He has spoken about this. So this isn't just me making things up randomly. This is what he said. It was an interview a few years ago when he was talking about the ending. And he says, the tone of the ending that I'm going for is bittersweet, which is often where people end and go, oh, what does bittersweet mean? He explains what bittersweet means. He says, I mean, it's no secret that Tolkien has been a huge influence on me, and I love the way he ended The Lord of the Rings. It ends with victory, but it's a bittersweet victory. Frodo is never whole again, and he goes away to the Undying Lands, and the other people live their lives. That's George R. R. Martin telling us how he wants to end A Song of Ice and Fire, the feel of it. And the one thing he references is Frodo being broken by it and having to leave the land, which I think is the strongest indication that we've got that that's the feel that he's wanting in terms of a character who gets broken by this experience and having to leave the land. Charis Ballerina picking up a question for Callum Barnes. Could you talk more to the hierarchy or social standing of Hobbit society? Thanks, Robert. I love all your stuff. Well, thank you very much to both of you. Yeah, I did a video. If you want the detail of this, I did a video called something like The Politics of the Shire or The Politics of Hobbits or something. I love doing that kind of video, incidentally. How does it work? Well, limited government is the first answer. There are not very many official posts. There's the mayor of Michel Delving, who is sort of like the head, but his role is mainly to preside over stuff. There are 2 official government posts, the first being the postman, effectively, the delivery service, and then secondly being the beaters, the people whose job it is to sort of go around the outside of the Shire and make sure that any nasty gribblies don't come in. There is the Thane, who is in charge. This is a historically it has sort of always come down the same family. I'll talk about families in just one moment. They are in charge of if they need to have a Hobbit army, they're in charge of it, but they never really need a Hobbit army. In terms of the structure, it's very family-based and very local-based. So in an area, you get families who stay in that area, and often the area is named after a particular family. So, and the families that we have, Sam Gamgee is also, the Gamgees are more sort of working class, but the families that we hear about, the Bagginses, the Tooks, and the Brandybucks, they are 3 of the richest, most distinguished houses there are. So the Brandybucks by the Brandywine River, the Tooks in Tookland, it's named after them, and they are basically the rulers. But most things are dealt with just in a family basis, just in locally, and if needs be, then it's sort of like the head of the family, the great Took, for example, who would be looking after things in Tookland, that kind of thing. So it's a sort of an idealized version of English Shire rural lands back in the day, where you have not a feudal system, it's a post-feudal system. There is no longer a king. They recognize a king, but the king is no longer there. So everybody sort of like works their own land, but it's a land of plenty, so there's lots to go around. I could talk more, but as I say, I've done a video on that one if you're interested in that. Question from Martin S. Have you read The Realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb? She tends to give her main characters pain. Fits chivalry Farseer for one. He goes through a lot in the first trilogy already. Yes, so the Farseer trilogy, definitely. I've talked about this a few times. If you've read the Farseer trilogy, as sounds like you have, you will see huge amounts of echoes between Robin Hobb's world and George R.R. Martin's world, which is not a coincidence, incidentally. They are really good friends as writers. They share, I think, an editor, and they started writing those two stories at the same time. Obviously, Robin Hobb has charged ahead and written many books since then. George R. Martin, slightly fewer. But he did. If you pick up Assassin's Apprentice, which is the first in that arc, you will find probably still on the front cover a quote from George R.R. Martin saying, "Robin Hobb is a diamond in a sea of zircons," which I think is one of those wonderful ways to describe a good writer. So yes, the echoes are very clear, and I think they are also very deliberate. Let's go to a question. Hang on. Let's go to a question from Dan McKay saying, I think Elijah Wood did an incredible job of interpreting Frodo. I saw the films before reading the books, which makes a difference in how you see the characters, of course. I'd like to hear your thoughts on how Wood's interpretation differed from the Frodo character of the books, and which film choices about the character you liked more and which less, if any. Well, yes, I agree. I think he did really well, and of all the characters there are, he's one of the characters they changed the least. It has to be said. So I think that his the way he portrayed him was excellent. There are changes. In the books, he is older, as we've said, because they had that 17-year time gap. So he's 50 in the books, whereas in the film, then he's very young. So that kind of comes across, I think, he's got a bit more of an innocence to him that he doesn't, I think, in the books. In the books, he's also more fun-loving. We see a little bit of that in the early sections of the film, the first film. But he comes across as very earnest, I think. And I don't mind this. I think this works really well. I think it echoes the character. There definitely is. That's part of the book character as well. But I think that he, from very early on, he does feel the weight of the world on him, which comes across more in the films than it does in the books. The one thing I really didn't like, though, is, and I didn't like to see full stop, there is a bit in the films where Gollum is trying to break apart Frodo and Sam, and Frodo turns on Sam and basically tells him to go away, and Sam does. He abandons Frodo. I really didn't like that scene. Really, that's not in the book. Sam would never have abandoned Frodo, and Frodo would not have got rid of Sam like that at that point. It's I really didn't like that. So, but generally speaking, I thought it was really good. I loved what he did. I mean, obviously the films are pretty amazing. And Empire, incidentally, have done, I think they do this every year, their top 100 films as voted by people, incidentally. And The Fellowship of the Ring has, I think, for the first time, come top. It always does really, really well, and I think that shows it works. Obviously, it works incredibly well as a film, and has lasted the test of time as well. Amy Smith saying Pippin's casting was unmatched. Yeah, Pippin, that he did really, really well there as well. And Kulnitsky saying Facebook is constantly showing me photos of the four hobbits having fun together years after. Yeah, they do. They genuinely seem to have got on, those four in particular. A lot of that group of actors clearly stayed in touch and got on with each other. But the four hobbits do, whenever they happen to be close to each other, do seem to all meet up and just have fun and enjoy good times with each other. Callie Summers had a couple of questions. One was, what made Frodo particularly suited to bear the ring? Was it just fate? Would Sam, Gimli, Legolas, or anyone have been able to actually throw the ring into the fire? Well, in terms of that one, I did do a couple of videos about both Sam and Gimli and what if they gave the ring to them. The answer is that this is fated for Frodo, so it has to be Frodo. I love Sam to bits, but I suspect if you had given the ring to him, he probably would have succumbed to the same fate as Frodo. Tolkien's very clear. The closer you get to Mount Doom, then the harder it is to resist the pull of the ring. The ring does not want to be destroyed, understandably. So I don't think anyone else would have done a better job than him, which is why Gollum's role was so pivotal. You then also asked about Smeagol and Gollum, effectively. What would have happened after he died? Because would he have gone to Valinor to heal before moving on? Sam had the ring for a little while, and he was allowed to go to Valinor. Bilbo did. Frodo did, of course. And Gollum, Smeagol, we have to say that although clearly by the time we see him, he's hugely corrupted and completely taken over by the ring, he had this for half a millennium. And during that time, he never seemed to get a bigger idea of, I shall use the power of this ring, than occasionally sneaking up on some orcs and killing them, or fishing for whatever he could find. And that, I think, has to, although we were told that he started off not a very nice person, that has to say something about his original character, because he didn't dream these great dreams of power. But Tolkien does specifically address this point in one of his letters. It's just a throwaway line, but somebody asks what was Gollum's eternal fate? What happened to him after he died? And he simply says this. He says, into the ultimate judgment upon Gollum, I would not care to inquire. This would be to investigate God's privité, as the medievals said. So basically, he's saying, I can't speculate. That's God. That's for God. That's Eru Iluvatar to decide what happens to him. That's beyond the scope of the story I'm telling. So, yeah, we can speculate, but we will never have the answer on that, because Tolkien himself never brought himself to think about that. You then also ask Callie about why wasn't casting the ring into the depths of the sea an option? Take it on a ship as far as possible and drop it. If it kept a Silmaril out of reach forever, why wouldn't it work for the ring? So this, pardon me, sorry, I've got a bit of a cough again today. This is a really good question. A lot of people do come up with. They say, well, why can't you do that? And the good news for us is that this was one of the things that, in the book at least, they did think about at the Council of Elrond. And it's clearly not a crazy question, because the person who suggests it is Glorfindel, who is pretty wise. And I'll read the whole quote, because I think this explains the full answer to this one. So then said Glorfindel, let us cast it into the deeps, and so make the lies of Saruman come true. The lies of Saruman here is Saruman told everybody that the ring had been washed out to sea and was now lost, because he wanted everybody else to stop looking for it so he could find it. Glorfindel says, let us cast it into the deeps, for it is clear now that even at the council his feet were already on a crooked path. He, Saruman, knew that the ring was not lost forever, but wished us to think so, for he began to lust for it himself. Yet oft in lies truth is hidden. In the sea it would be safe. So Glorfindel is making this point. Let's do it. Let's just throw the ring into the sea. Gandalf replies, not safe forever, said Gandalf. There are many things in the deep waters, and seas and lands may change, and it is not our part here to take thought only for a season, or for a few lives of men, or for a passing age of the world. We should seek a final end of this menace, even if we do not hope to make one. So that's Gandalf's response, and I think that's the response we have to go with, is why not throw this into the sea? Because, yeah, that would get rid of the problem for years, maybe centuries, maybe even millennia, but it's not going to get rid of the problem forever. Sauron is immortal. Gandalf is also immortal. The only way to get rid of this forever is to destroy it, not throw it into the seas. Him saying, things move and shift around. Middle-earth has been changed lots of times. If you read the Silmarillion, continents rise and fall a lot. Now, as far as we can tell, that was it. But Numenor was created, sunk back down. Beleriand, the whole land off to the west of what we now think of as Middle-earth, was completely sunk at the end of the First Age. The Earth itself, in one version of it, got changed from being flat to being curved. An entire continent was created and destroyed. This happens a lot. So for Gandalf, just let's throw it to the bottom of the sea didn't actually mean that much, because that could suddenly be brought back up again. A sea creature could swallow it and then could swim up the coast, and it could be found that way. And there are lots of different options. It had to be destroyed is basically his only conclusion. Urias Tosh saying Gandalf was just being a party-pooping joy kill. Well, absolutely. But, he made the right decisions to create a great story in the end. One angry pagan saying, which Discworld character study should I do? Vines. Great character. 444. Actually, this is my last question from one of my patrons. So now's a good time to drop some questions into the chat. I'll try and get through as many of them as I can. 444 saying, not exactly a question about Frodo. As this year passes, it's 30 years since my first and only reading of The Lord of the Rings, which was done in my native language of Polish. I set a new goal to listen this year to Lord of the Rings in its original language. From all I know, I would probably love the BBC radio edition. Unfortunately, this is not on my audiobook streaming service, and audio set is too expensive. My audiobook streaming service has an option to choose between versions narrated by Rob Inglis and Andy Serkis. Of course, I'm familiar with Andy Serkis's work as an actor, but I've never heard him narrating anything. So I wonder if either I or the chat can recommend either of those versions. Well, if you've listened to them in the chat, please do add your own thoughts to this. I will happily give my own. Yes, I think that the early 80s, I can't remember the exact time when it was, the BBC radio adaptation is the best one out there. It's not an audio book. It's not a person reading the story, but in terms of an actual adaptation of Tolkien's work, it's brilliant. If you can't get that, yeah, there are two versions. I've listened to both the Rob Inglis one and the Andy Serkis one. Andy Serkis recorded it just quite recently. He did the background to that is he did a reading of The Hobbit for charity, all the way through, just live read it for charity. And then people liked it so much that got released officially, and he then went on and recorded The Lord of the Rings. Now, as it happens, I was talking to Mark Huntz just earlier today about this very issue, about before this question came in, and he's now listening to the two of them. He's now going through the Rob Inglis one. I think his views, apologies, Mark, if I'm misrepresenting your views here, but I think his views are probably similar to mine. Andy Serkis is clearly a great actor, and that is what he brings to this. So if you're wanting someone who throws their everything into the different character voices, obviously he's amazing as Gollum, and that brings a whole extra layer to it. It never sounds 100% right with somebody else doing Gollum, it has to be said. So if that's what you're wanting, then yes, definitely him. Rob Inglis, this was recorded a few years ago now. He's got a very different style. It's a lot more straightforward is probably the wrong way of saying it. But I personally prefer that version. That's my personal preference. It's most accessible in terms of he's just telling the story and letting the words do the hard work, rather than, yes, he does do different voices and things, but not to the extent to distract you away from the actual story. But I'm sure people in the chat have got some thoughts. Curtis Frank saying, I love how Rob Inglis does the songs. Yeah, absolutely agree with that. Amy Smith saying, I'm torn. The Serkis one is incredible, but the English one is more immersive. Yeah, that's a good word. Callie Summers saying, not sure if Robert missed my silly speculation on Patreon or he just rolled his eyes. Maybe did I miss it in one of your questions? Here we go. We'll answer that. Sorry, I do apologize there, Callie. What would have happened if Bilbo had made a bad persuasion check against Smaug and Smaug just ate Bilbo in the ring? His fire couldn't destroy it, but would he realize what he had and or be able to use it? How would the Nazgul try to retrieve it? Crazy speculation. Thank you for that. I'm tempted to go with this is Tolkien's world and it's all down to fate, so that would not have happened. But let's go with what it is. How Sauron would have wanted to recover it, absolutely, and I think he would have found a way to do that. The thing we do not know, because we didn't ever see it, what would Smaug have been able to see the ring wraiths? He could not see Bilbo when he wore the ring, so the implication has to be he would not be able to see the ring wraiths either. So presumably they would have been able to get very close, found the weak spot, the soft spot on Smaug's belly, and kill him. So that would be my guess. Sauron would not have let something as simple as being eaten by a dragon get in his way. Martin S. saying, this is referring back to the dropping it into the sea point. I think the sea would not have broken the ring's power. Sauron had a vast military advantage. Without the ring's destruction taking Sauron with it, Sauron was about to win the war. Yeah, that's an excellent point. I should have said that as well, actually. It was just hiding the ring effectively, which is what that is, would not change the balance of where they were at in the war. Sauron's army was vastly bigger than anything that the others had. The Battle of the Pelennor Fields was lost, but then they came back. But then when Aragorn and co got to Mordor and the Black Gates opened, it's like there's an even bigger army inside there, isn't there? They would have been decimated. They would have been completely destroyed. And once Gondor had gone, even if the elves of Lothlorien and the like survived for a while, they couldn't have survived forever, because the elves do not keep reproducing. They were always being drawn off to the west. This would not have survived. Sauron would have won. I think that's reasonably clear. Charis Ballerina picking a question from Amy Smith. Thank you, saying, what was the suspicion of foul play with Frodo's parents dying? And Jason Keane asking, is Middle-earth deterministic or free will? Well, that's a huge question. Is it deterministic or free will? A bit of both. And I think that Tolkien tried to hold that intention in the way that Christian theology tries to hold that intention. It is all according to the ineffable plan of Eru Iluvatar, but within that, people have free will, I think, is probably the way that he would say it, which is, if you start to try and look at that philosophically, a bit of a fudge, but that's the way that Tolkien viewed our world, and that's the way that he viewed his world operating. In terms of, was there a suspicion of foul play? It's never really mentioned as such. Why would, it's not like the agents of Sauron knew or cared about the Shire at the time, or the Bagginses. So it sounds just like it was just purely an accident. It did lead to Frodo being fostered by Bilbo, which is good, and again coming together to Eru's overarching ineffable plan. Reflective Rambling picking up a question for Just a Fat Civi. We know the forces of good had currency. What about the forces of evil? Was there an economy, and if so, what did it look like? Well, yes, there was. Feel free to check out my video on Sauron's economy. I went into this. So, yes, there was money. He basically had, Mordor was the heart of his empire. Then he had vassal states basically around the outside. They would bring things into Mordor because Mordor itself obviously was not the easiest of places for people to be living in. The southern part of Mordor did have a big saltwater lake and an area that you could farm in. So that's where the food came from. The mining and heavy industry happened in the plain of Gorgoroth, which is the bit that we think of when we think of Mordor. That's up in the northwest. We know a lot less about the other plain in the northeast, but the implication has to be that the volcanic ash, which was there, did make part of Mordor very fertile. So yes, there was a cash economy, but this was very much a directive and run centrally. This wasn't a free market economy by any sense of the word. This is authoritarian. Morning Throne is saying, isn't Frodo's dad named Drogo Baggins? Yes, absolutely. That is his name. Question from Charis Ballerina, picking up for Skidu Rita, saying, given how some hobbits are relatively closer to the elves than men, were there differences between local hobbit dialects? Yes, I'm just trying to think through. Tolkien did talk about dialects. Obviously, he's a language person, and this is a thing. Just as a tangent to this. This is one of those things where sometimes I think Tolkien aficionados get quite focused in on the correct pronunciation of different things, but Tolkien very clearly understood that in world things were pronounced in different ways, and I think that we should take that as what he understands, that we will pronounce things in different ways because we come at things with our own personal accents. So I don't think he was as tough on correct pronunciation. Yes, he wanted people to know what the correct pronunciation of something was, but if we come at it with our accent, I think that he was probably a lot more lenient on it than perhaps some people within the Tolkien community are. As for hobbits having different accents, I can't think. Honestly, there's always one thing that my mind goes blank on. The Shire is large enough, and people move around not much, that there could be different accents within the hobbits, but I can't think of a specific example when he talked about that. I will, if I can, pardon me, I will come back next week if I find that example, or if anyone in the chat has got an example of that, then I would love to hear it. Right. Let's quickly flick through the chat. Curtis Frank saying there's 100% chance that they had variable accents. Ray J saying there are different sayings between the hobbits of Bree and those in the Shire. Yeah, absolutely. Question from Supervillain Tat and Supply saying, once Gandalf starts to suspect Frodo's ring might be a great one, which could it have logically been other than the One Ring? Well, I mean, it's a good question, but the fact is that he wasn't there for the forging of the rings, and he hasn't seen all these rings. So in the absence of clear descriptions of all of these rings, he would not know. So it could be any of them. He knows his ring. He knows about the two rings, the one that Elrond and Galadriel had. But that's it. He doesn't know about the other rings. So he doesn't know what they look like. He doesn't even know, to start with, that the One Ring had the inscription on it, or when you put it into the fire, the burning letters. So the answer is that he simply does not know the information that we know. So no, he wouldn't have known that automatically. Ray J saying, I hope Frodo could have met Nienna in Valar. Yeah, the Valar. Yeah, that would be really nice, actually. Curtis Frank saying, one could say that Eru wrote the music and then the individual actors each produced variations on the theme assigned to them. Yeah, that's another way of looking at the predestination versus free will within Middle-earth argument. Ben Melmoth saying, hi, I'm watching live from Northern Thailand. Hi there, Ben. And let's go to having a quick flick through. Ellen McLeod saying, I'm curious to know what would happen if Sauron had gone after Frodo himself. Would the story still happen or not? Well, I think he sent out the better chance was with 9 riders, to be honest. Did Frodo and Legolas ever interact? Yes, but not hugely. And Amy Smith saying, highly recommend the Making of Middle-earth book. I got it at Christmas and it's been a great casual read. Yeah, I think I've read that one. Anyway, I think with this, I will probably start drawing this one to a close. Next week, we're going to come back with A Song of Ice and Fire again. We're working our way through Targaryen rulers. So the next one we're going to be doing is looking at King Aenys, who was the second after King Aegon the Conqueror. Actually, Martin S. with a quick question saying, was Frodo a good rider? Seems like he could handle as philosopher speed without too much of a problem. We're not told particularly he walked lots rather than rode. Hobbits tended not to ride. I mean, big horses were obviously too much for them. When he's there getting to Rivendell, part of the time he's there being taken by Glorfindel, so it's not really him doing the riding. But yeah, I wouldn't put any of the hobbits as good riders. I'll be back with looking at Aenys the First, and then after that, Maegor. I've done a couple of videos recently on Maegor, and I thought it'd be fun to look at him. In terms of videos coming up, I've got one. If you're a Witcher fan, I've decided I would do, rather than cover the Richer Blood origin directly, I thought it might be interesting for people to have a video on the conjunction of the spheres, which is a fascinating subject if you're into the Witcher-verse at all. So I've got that one coming up very soon, and we've got some more Lord of the Rings ones. And what am I coming up with? Littlefinger's Master Plan. If you ever wondered what Littlefinger's Master Plan is, that's going to be coming up at some point quite soon, as well as an economics of the Dance of the Dragons. So those are a few things that I'm working my way through at the moment. But I will be back this time next week with another live stream. Thank you to moderators. You do an amazing job. Patrons, thank you very much. There will be a link appearing somewhere up here if you're watching back later to other live streams that I have been doing. Link appearing about here to my Patreon page, which is the best way to support this channel if you wish to do so. That's all for this time. Take care, everyone, and I will see you again soon.